Canadians stand united in sending our love and support to our friends in London. We stand with you all.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau offering Canadian support following the deadly London attack. Trudeau took a moment during last night's Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner to send his prayers. 7 people were killed, many more injured, and we know that 1 Canadian was, in the words of officials, directly impacted. This according to the High Commission in London in the United Kingdom. It says, "We have been advised that a Canadian citizen was directly impacted by the attack in London last night. Consular officials continue to monitor the situation and to offer support." Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum panel. Joining me today, freelance journalist Susan Riley, Denise CLA from the SEM Group at Public Affairs, and Katie O'Malley from iPolitics. All of them join us from Ottawa. Guys, I want to thank you for joining us today on this issue, and some others we're going to look at as well. But let's talk and begin with what is unfolding in London as the arrests continue and the world reacts to it. Let's deal with, and we'll start with you, Susan. Let's talk about tone. Let's talk about the need for politicians to react at times like this. And as we said off the top there, the Prime Minister reacting at the dinner last night.
It's gotten all too familiar, sadly, John. It's very predictable. The expressions, of, the laments, the expressions of solidarity, they're heartfelt. I mean, obviously, when innocent tourists are killed, it affects us all. It's frightening. It's unfair. It's unjust. But it's also kind of pointless, to tell you the truth. Theresa May. Sorry, Theresa May saying, enough is enough. Well, right. I mean, really, is enough? I mean, what good does that possibly do? The only kind of bump in this very kind of smooth choreography came, not surprisingly, from Donald Trump, who was actually criticizing on Twitter, criticizing the Mayor of London. The Mayor of London had told people in London, "You're going to see a lot of police around, don't be alarmed." Trump kind of distorted the message and said, "Oh, he's telling Londoners not to be alarmed. They should be alarmed." Apart from that, it's sadly predictable.
Susan, no, I cannot agree with you on that, because there's nothing predictable about this. We're talking about people's lives here, and there's no choreography here. So whatever Theresa May says, whatever the Mayor of London says, whatever our Prime Minister says, it is really about how are we reassuring our citizens about what's going on. It's informational. It's giving information to folks. And for me personally, as a Canadian, I look at there's so many similarities between London and Ottawa. We're capitals. We're multicultural. And in fact, for Ottawa, as we come into celebrating our 150th, I want to hear from the Prime Minister and all of the relevant agencies that they're not choreographing messages, but they're saying to Canadians, you know what, terrorism exists and it's real, but continue to live your lives as Canadians and we are protecting you. And to me, that's way more important than any political message.
Well, see, but Denise, I don't think they are protecting us necessarily. I mean, I'm not sure if you can protect against this kind of thing. Okay, but I mean, I'm just saying, I'm just saying it's so predictable and it's so essentially meaningless, I think.
We're going to let Katie weigh in on this, but before you do, to the point that both of you have been making, we have a response from the spokesperson for the Mayor of London. This is Sadiq Khan's spokesperson talking about Donald Trump's tweets, saying that the Mayor of London has more important things to do than respond to Donald Trump's ill-informed tweet that deliberately takes out of context his remarks, urging Londoners not to be alarmed when they saw more police. And that's effectively what they said to say. Don't be upset if you see more police on the street, including armed officers on the street. So there we have it, ill-informed tweet. Katie, if you want to weigh in on this, on the question of tone and political reaction to what we saw on the streets of London.
I think that's a pretty good example of an excellent tone. I mean, you got to wonder, the Mayor of London does have indeed a lot to deal with today. He's probably not slept since sometime last night. And now he has to respond to sort of an ill-advised, ignorant tweet from someone who happens to be the President of the United States and not just another egg on Twitter. It's an excellent example of how it's the most sort of graceful yet dismissive way of responding to something like that and getting back to what matters. It's been interesting watching the reaction for me of actual Londoners to Donald Trump's tweet, which is basically basically been the eye rolls, and the very British eye rolls have been fast and furious. And there really is that sense that, and I'm actually going to take sort of a middle area here between Denise and Susan. I actually think that there's a place for those statements. I think that they don't have to be sort of overwrought and over emotional. But yeah, it's important to kind of express on behalf of Canada that, gosh, this is an awful thing, and we really feel for you guys, and we're here if you need us. At the same time, it is really important not to send people into a panic over living their day-to-day lives. And as an Ottawan, I think that, to be honest, I think most of us are more worried about the sort of constant construction and transport and logistical issues ending up making the 2017 celebrations more complicated and more of a headache for those of us living here than we are of terrorism, because you can't really anticipate it. You just got to kind of go on and live your life. Exactly. And I think that the fact that these attacks happen, that doesn't say the strategy is a failure. It says that you cannot anticipate and sort of avoid everything. So just go on and live your lives.
Summer,
but I would go further, and I would say that the blanket saturation coverage from all the news channels, I'm not singling out CBCNN or any other particular channel. Us too, we're contributing to it. I think it gives a megaphone to the people who conduct these attacks. Obviously, you can't ignore it. I mean, it's happening in the capital. Canadians have a lot of connection with London. You deplore it, you lament it. But the saturation, endless, repetitive coverage.
But Susan,
I think it feeds into the aims of the people who do these things.
Susan, point taken. But I think also what people are trying to do is the search for answers. We have people from the academic level to the religious level to the political level trying to find out how this that is happening not only just here, of course, in Canada and Europe, throughout Europe. We've seen the attacks in Egypt ramped up, in Kabul as well. The British Prime Minister talking about effectively changing tactics, about going after internet use, about extending the right to keep people in custody without due process effectively. Canada part of the Five Eyes, presumably there will be some gaze towards, because perhaps Trump is out of the mix, or at least not as seriously as other U.S. presidents might have been taken under these circumstances. What role could Canada play if Ralph Goodale's phone rings and it's British authorities saying, crack down on the internet, we want you to work with transnational religious organizations, et cetera, et cetera? What effect could this have in terms of our ongoing efforts internationally and working with our allies? Denise, go ahead. Yeah.
John, that's precisely it, the Five Eyes. And I would actually take a step back and say, you know, after what happened in Manchester, the horrible terrorist attack, and where we saw that the UK and the US had questions around, well, in fact, the UK had said, look, we're not going to share intelligence with the US anymore around these issues. So I think the question in terms of where Canada fits in there is when these types of things happen to our dearest allies, what kind of access and intelligence do we have? And from what I understand, there's a simple 3 or 4 step process where there's an assertion as to whether there's a Canadian connection, whether the suspected perpetrators had traveled to Canada or had have any Canadian relatives and all of those things. And so in terms of thinking about those Five Eyes, as you call it, in my view, the most important component at this point is, number one, for Canadians to be reassured that we are getting intelligence from all of our allies on these emerging terrorist threats and activities that, quite frankly, they're scaring people. Like it is hard. You want to say, go forward and continue to go about your daily life, but folks are starting to look over their shoulder and say, well, hang on a second. And I'm really keen to hear, and as many Canadians are keen to hear, exactly, look, what's Canada's threat level? Where do we stand? And let's hear from our officials.
Well, we've heard from Ralph Goodale. I think we have a tweet from him that we can put up saying simply this: more terror attacks in London, appalling brutality, keeping the victims in our prayers, but the British will never, ever give in. We are still waiting this morning from the latest from the Prime Minister. We understand he is going to make some comment about this directly impacted Canadian. Katie, to get you to weigh in on this in terms of how this could affect Canada's interaction with its allies and its own security policies moving forward.
Well, one thing that just sort of by coincidence, the way these things unfold, Canada and Ralph Goodale and the government have actually been consulting on, you might recall, the anti-terror bill that the Conservatives brought in that was quite controversial. And the Liberals, when they were campaigning, vowed to sort of review it and look at aspects of that that could be changed. They then went through like a year of consultations. That report has come out, and I think the plan was to bring in perhaps some changes, in some cases to make it possibly tighter in some areas, but also looking at more issues that received a lot of criticism at the time, the no-fly list, the lack of an appeal, some of the issues involving allowing intelligence agencies to surveil and to get involved in activities on Canadian soil. So I suspect that conversation is definitely going to be it's going to be informed by what we've seen happening in the UK, but at the same time, you can't simply transpose what the society and the rules and the law there into Canada and expect that it's a perfect match. We have our own situation, we've got our own sort of frameworks. In terms of sharing intelligence with our allies, I suspect that Canada will continue to be a part of the Five Eyes. At the same time, taking into account that we actually have some pretty strong privacy protections and some pretty strong restrictions in place here to ensure that our law enforcement agencies are kept under civilian oversight, which is pretty crucial, and I don't see that wavering much, if at all, in the future. And finally, on the whole issue of sort of regulating the internet, it's hard to see how that would go over particularly well anywhere. I frankly don't think it's being welcomed as a proposal in the UK even now, and it would be even more regarded as perhaps an unnecessary incursion onto freedom of speech back here, and definitely south of the border.
But here's the eternal argument, and let's just say one thing about this London incident. I mean, it took the police, somebody tweeted, 8 minutes to capture the people responsible, and the arrests continue. Same thing in Manchester. So the question that arises in a lot of frustrated people's minds is, why didn't they arrest them before they planted the bomb? But that is the essential problem of democracy, and as Katie said, it's the question we dealt with here in Canada over Bill C-51. You can't arrest people until they're proven guilty of something, and that's really a problem, but it's irresolvable.